Ladies and gentlemen,
Good evening.
are you ready?
Okay, here we go.
You're listening to the Deal Room Podcast. Join us as we bring you the inside scoop on business sales and acquisitions. Get across trends in the area and hear the industry's best recount their real-life tips, traps, and experiences. Now, here's your host, Joanna Oakey.
Hi, it's Joanna Oakey here, and welcome back to the Deal Room Podcast, a podcast proudly brought to you by our commercial legal practice, Aspect Legal. Now, in today's chat, you're going to hear from Dru Morgan, the Director of Morgan Business Sales. Dru brings to the table more than 25 years of rich experience in selling businesses across a variety of sectors and regions. Now, in this discussion today, Dru walks us through some of the perks of scaling through acquisition and, of course, the ultimate payoff in selling. He also walks us through the innovative practices he's developed over the years as he's grown his own brokerage, Morgan Business Sales. Now, let's jump right in. Okay, Dru, huge thank you for coming on to the Deal Room Podcast today. I am super excited for today's discussion.
Thanks, Joe. Thanks for having me again.
My absolute pleasure. Okay, now today we're talking about one of my absolute favourite topics, and that is growth through acquisition. Now, the reason that I love this topic is because I'm a lawyer. Everyone who listens to this probably has gotten on to the fact that I'm a lawyer by now. The problem is with being a lawyer, most of the stuff that you do as a lawyer that's outside of this area is all about risk and risk management, right? But in acquisitions and the opportunity of growth through acquisitions, I feel it's the one way that we as lawyers are actually able to add real value to businesses. And this idea, this conceptual point that acquisitions can be such a powerful way to grow a business is something that I just think I'm so grateful to have seen and understood in the industry and be able to bring this insight. And I just think it's such a huge opportunity for businesses who are cranking through those old methods of organic growth that have got a really good base but just haven't thought about this as an opportunity. So I'd love your thoughts, Dru. What are your thoughts on this?
It's businesses and it's business brokers, I think, as a whole. A lot of them traditionally haven't thought it that way moving forward. So there's a lot of businesses out there that we get in contact with and suggest the idea to them as a way to grow, and they've never had it suggested to them before. And it's just something that we do, and it's something that we embrace wholeheartedly, but it's not common. As an industry, business brokers traditionally work on the sell side. So it's unusual for them, I'm speaking in general terms, but unusual for most business brokers to work on the buy side. Most of them probably haven't done it or have done it a small amount. But it's something that we do quite a bit, and it's something that if you unlock and really focus on, you can do it really well and you can make really good money, and it's an enjoyable experience. It just takes a bit of thought on how to do it. And there are clients out there, and we were talking earlier about a deal we did together last year where we were on the buy side with a client. And that was a decent sized deal. I think it was around $5 million or thereabouts. But that client had a line of credit, about $50 million, or a larger company that established with the pure intent of acquiring different businesses in Australia. So we worked with that client over a period, I think it was about 12 months, to identify the types of businesses that they wanted to buy. They paid us a regular monthly retainer throughout that period, and we did the transaction for them. And it was really enjoyable to do. And it's somewhat easier to do that. As an agent, you're really dealing with one client, as opposed to when you're working on the sell side, you could have 40 or 50 inquiries on a business. You've got all sorts of things going into CRM, all sorts of notes, different buyers wanting inspections, and it can be a little chaotic. When you're on the buy side, it can be more relaxed. You can be dealing with a number of sellers, but it's just an easier conversation to have, because when you talk to the sellers, they know that you've got a legitimate buyer in your hand, and you explain what the buyer is looking for and whether they'd be interested. And they're really good conversations to have, and it can be a really enjoyable field if you take the time to understand it. And that buyer that we dealt with is a fantastic person.
absolutely is. Oh, look, it was a fantastic transaction for many reasons. I got to work with you, Dru, so that was obviously fantastic.
Yeah.
We had a fantastic client, but it's also like it also feeds all of these things that I really love, which is the finding good deals. I really enjoy being in what I feel are good deals that will lead to outcomes that, ultimately are these business growth. And I think this is the thing, I guess, this client that we're talking about here, he had cottoned on at some point, probably many years ago, to this opportunity of growth through acquisition. And he's on fire, right? He's out there. And the classic things, when I deal with a first-time seller or a first-time buyer, there's always that hesitance as they get close to the line of completing or exchanging, where these things come up from them. And what they're dealing with is their own emotion of dealing with an area that they haven't dealt with before. It's so lovely sometimes to deal with people who know what they're doing, understand that there's risk, but that's not the driving thing for them because they can see the larger opportunity of value that outweighs what is that sort of conservative risk approach for people who are new into this area. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, we're making life easy for them at the end of the day. Like that particular buyer, he had a couple $100 million company offshore that he'd established. Obviously, as an intelligent person, but trying to acquire a business in Australia on your own and going through a variety of different business brokers and just calling and emailing, it's a big task and daunting and having to review information. Whereas when that client engaged us and said, look, could you do this for me? Could you, do some initial due diligence on these types of businesses and get your head around what you think would suit me and then just deliver me the ones that you think would suit me. And, so it's obviously a huge time saving for him. So it makes life a lot easier for them and simplifies the process. And also when you get to questions like, particularly people offshore aren't au fait with some of the laws in Australia and different states, and there was a lot of questions in that transaction when we got to the pointy end, a lot of times where that client would just phone me and say, is this normal? Is this how this should work? And I'm like, yeah, that's exactly how it should work. It's okay. Like, you're in good hands with Joe and yeah, that's how it works. But it's made their life simpler because they just had somebody to talk to. Where going into it on your own, it can be daunting, particularly if you're spending, the plan for him, for that client, is to spend $50 million over the next 12 months. And so there's a lot of transactional work there, and it just gives them comfort to do it. Yeah, good service to provide.
Yeah. And as I say, I love it. I love that opportunity building side of legal work as opposed to just this sort of focus on risk. And it's fantastic to help make good deals happen. But what got you firstly, what got you into buy side? And then secondly, can you answer me, like, having a lot of brokers in buy side is quite common overseas in many other countries, but not at all common here in Australia. Like, really rare. Why? I don't understand. Talk me through it.
Yeah, it's just not tradition here. To be fair, though, we don't have maybe as many big businesses in Australia as you would in the US or something like that. There's a lot of small business in Australia, so maybe, like, you want to be paid to be engaged. Maybe that's not common in small businesses. It just isn't. It's just, I think, historically not a place where business brokers have put a lot of energy into in Australia for whatever reason. But moving forward, you asked me about what's ahead in business broking. I think it's a side that business brokers don't have to be scared of. They're just going to learn to embrace it as part of what we do. We should be working on both sides. That client, and the way we started doing it was we always, year in, year out, had requests, people looking for things. And like most business brokers originally, years ago, we paid them very little interest. Then we started paying them attention. Okay, let's put some effort into this client. It's going to take time, so we'll charge them a fee. And then you realise clients are happy to pay it. They're happy to pay you a fee or a monthly retainer to do the work because it's saving them a lot of time and energy, particularly if you deliver a really good result. So we charge them a monthly fee, and if they buy something, we rebated that fee off the cost of the transaction anyway. So essentially it costs them nothing. It would only, if they didn't find something, would cost them something, would cover our expenses. But that ended up being a terrific relationship with the client, and that client will go on to buy the things, and I'm sure he'll refer us to other clients. And if you're not doing that work as a business broker, it's just a field you should really take a good look at because you're cutting off half your business if you don't do that.
I just find it fascinating. I'll tell you the other sort of fascinating thing. It makes absolute sense to me to have a business model as a broker where you can charge monthly retainers along the way. And I've seen many business brokers do that successfully, but the vast majority don't and are scared of that approach, whether you're talking buy side or sell side. When did you get started in that? Did you find that was a big, scary leap? Because the argument I hear is they'll go to a number of other business brokers down the road who aren't charging them. So obviously you have to prove that you're better than the competition that aren't.
Yeah, it's a great question. I guess it just comes to backing yourself a little bit is the only way to answer that. You had to draw a line in the sand somewhere, because the issue is that in this industry, you can be viewed as a free service. Like, you can charge somebody an initial fee to put their information together. But from that point on, if you don't do that, you're just a free service. You're bringing them offers, you're marketing the business, you're doing all this stuff for free. And it doesn't work. The business brokers end up providing that free service over and over again on 20 or 30 or 40 listings, how many they carry. And they get burnt out, they don't earn any money, it doesn't work. And a lot of those sellers are just using them as that free service and genuinely wasting business brokers' time. They're like, oh, if you think you can get me $3 million for the business, great, let's just see what happens. If you can't, and I think the business brokers don't realise what they're doing. They're really just providing that service for nothing and for no result. But what I find did happen when we started doing that, which was a few years ago, that all it did really was sort the hay from the chaff. Like, all the clients that were serious had no issue with it at all. And then the clients that said, oh, no, actually, I just want a free service, they didn't list with us. So we certainly lost those listings. But retrospectively, that is okay. They went and listed with other firms, which we were happy for them to do, because we retained the good clients, and clients who really just wanted to waste someone's time, they wasted other people's time. Yeah, it's actually worked out quite well, because we're not a company, the whole sort of thesis with this company is not to be a company that trades on high volume of stock, which is important to some companies, but it's not to us. The whole idea and philosophy on this company is really just to trade on good stock with good clients and provide good businesses to good buyers. And we don't need quantity and we don't want quantity. So if somebody wants to use a free service, that's okay. It just won't be with us. They can list it with. There are companies who will take it on that way. I think you've got to draw a line in the sand somewhere. And I'm just lucky enough to be in the game for such a long time that you're like, okay, we're not doing this for free anymore. It's a silly way of doing it. And with brokers, it just enhances their life, because they're dealing with less clients who pay them properly, as opposed to more clients that don't pay them properly. And if you spoke to any broker and asked them which bucket they would rather be in, it's a no-brainer. It's just mentally making that mind shift from one to the other. It sometimes takes a little bit of work.
Yeah,
yes.
Absolutely. And one other thing that I wanted to talk about, and actually we're moving back in our discussion point a bit, but one thing that I just recalled that I wanted to talk about, we talked about that, the acting buy side and just more generally that sort of experience in the acting for buyers who are multiple buyers, who have bought multiple businesses and who are acquiring because they completely understand now the benefit in growth through acquisition. What is the sell? I just want to talk about the benefits for a seller in selling to that sort of buyer, because I think there are a lot of benefits, and I've acted on both sides of the table in that type of transaction with that acquirer who has bought lots of businesses. We've acted for lots of acquirers who buy lots of businesses. So I see it from their perspective. I've also acted for many sellers to aggregators or sophisticated buyers. And I see lots and lots of benefits. And I'll talk about mine in a moment, but I'd like to hear from your side, what is that benefit? What do you talk about when you approach?
I could go either way with that, to be fair. I think to a point, the downside with dealing with one buyer, if you're a seller, is that you don't know if you're extracting the maximum price. That is the downside, because you're not going to market. So you're not going out there to 30 different buyers saying, here's what I have, how much are you going to pay me? And you get multiple offers and you make sure you're extracting the best one. So you're not going to do that if you have one buyer. The upside is when you're having 30 different conversations and you're doing all these negotiations, and it can get crazy. And as a seller, it can become really stressful. And when you're dealing with one buyer, that alleviates all that. It's a much simpler one-way conversation. And if that buyer's got genuine intent or a good buyer, it becomes a far simpler way to transact your sale. But I think there's flaws and against either way in those respects.
Well, I think there's a good point that you make. And I'll come back to my point a little bit later. I want to drill into this more. This issue, if you're approaching a seller, so you're the only buyer on the table for them at the time, how do you get a seller comfortable with costs without them going to market?
It's really difficult, to be honest with you. Like, you can do an appraisal and give them a fair bit of data. But I think the difficulty in business sales is if you compare it to real estate, for example, there's an enormous amount of data that sellers can look at. If they've got a 4-bedroom house in Sydney or wherever it is, they can quite easily get some good comparables and understand at least a range that they're in. In business sales, they're more or less going off our word. Like, we say, look, here's some results that we've done of different sales in engineering or in civil or whatever industry you're in. But no two businesses are ever the same. Right? So if we've sold an engineering company in Melbourne, it may be drastically different from one in Brisbane, engineering a different product. So that seller really has to take a word. They're never really genuinely sure. And I think that's why you'll find once you hit a certain price point in business sales, say $10 million or over, most of the deals we do over $10 million don't have a price. They're nearly all expression of interest. And the reason that's done, and that's nearly an industry norm, whether in the US or Australia or wherever it is, the reason those transactions are done that way, they're nearly all expressions of interest with a closing date. And the reason for that is you want to extract as many offers as you can out of the marketplace, and you let the marketplace dictate the price to a certain extent, what they will pay, what private equity will pay and what industry groups will pay, and what private buyers will pay. With smaller businesses, it's a bit easier. Businesses under $1 million, for example, you've got a lot more data and you can be a lot more specific. For us, transacting mostly larger businesses, it gets tricky to get a lot of data, and a lot of time that's the great unknown for a seller, just to come back to answer the question. If they look us in the eye and say, you've got me an offer here of $8 million or whatever, is that genuinely the best offer in the marketplace? I just have to genuinely look them back and say, look, I don't know. From everything that we've put forward, it seems like it's certainly within the ballpark, or it seems like a good buyer to deal with. You can certainly take that. It's an easy transaction. It's a cash buy. The alternative is to not take it and go to market and invite that buyer to be part of the expression of interest. But the issue you may have then is that buyer may just completely get turned off and walk away, and you may have lost the best offer that you have. So it's not an easy decision for a seller. No easy way to answer that. There's certainly pluses and minuses either way.
Oh, it's a fantastic sort of discussion point as well, from the perspective that the best deals are done between not just a willing and enthusiastic buyer and an enthusiastic seller, right? But I guess the problem with going and headhunting our sellers is that they haven't necessarily come to the view independently that this is now their time. And it can be an emotional process. We all know, for someone selling their business, sometimes they really need time, notwithstanding they might have someone externally saying, this is time to retire from the business, or whatever. It's just that the idea sometimes is a lot more enticing than as they get closer to that reality. So do you find when you've got a buy-side mandate and you're out there approaching businesses that haven't gone to market yet, that there's a higher attrition rate of sellers, a higher rate of them pulling out? Or how do you assess who the right sellers are rather than those sellers that...
Another thing to consider, Joe, is that demographic. So most of our clients that have established businesses, particularly larger ones, $5 to $15 million sort of companies that we approach and say, look, I've got a buyer that would like to do something. Most of those clients are probably in their 70s. They're not in their 20s. And some of the decisions that they weigh up is, if I got an offer today of $8 million, am I better off taking that and doing a nice, easy, simple, discreet transaction that no one would know about? Or am I better off going to market in the hope that I might get 8.5 or 9 million? And sometimes that's actually a far easier question for them to answer. Like they'll just say, look, give me the simple option. At this stage of my life, I don't actually care whether I get $500,000 more or not. So sometimes it's an easier personal decision. It's not always about money. Sometimes it is, and sometimes you have that conversation with sales. I've got a buyer and he's happy to pay you X amount for what you've got based on what you've given me, and they say, should we go to market? And I just say that possibly you could get $1 million more if you went to market for this. We don't know. And they're like, yep, let's do that. Let's go to market. And sometimes money is important, but I do find in that demographic more often than not, simplicity is more important than money. And it's a really important factor. And something that's stress-free as opposed to something with a lot of stress and a lot of different parties and information going to places they're not sure of and information going to competitors and their key management finding out that they've spent 10 years setting up. And it's a real consideration. So sometimes it makes a lot of sense for them to not concentrate on the end dollar value and concentrate on the simplicity of dealing with one buyer.
Okay, fantastic. And one thing that I wanted to round back on, which I foreshadowed as well, was some of the benefits that I think are there for sellers in dealing with that buyer that has approached them, or a sophisticated buyer, not even just a buyer that's approached them. Because in many instances, our clients who are selling to a multiple acquirer, it won't necessarily have been headhunted. They might actually be on the market. So they may have other buyers that they are also considering at the same time. And I think buyer selection is very important, and particularly if you're in the size of market or the type of deal that means there's some relationship post-completion, and it's going to be a relationship post-completion if you've got an earn-out, for example, or if there's equity that you're leaving in the business.
Well, equity, actually, that deal we had, they actually left some equity on the table, which is really interesting. That large group wanted the owner. They offered 100% buyout, or they said, if you like, we're a huge group, you can be part of us moving forward and retain 10%, it's up to you. And I think that's a great example of a bit of upside for a seller. The hands are out of it, but you've retained something that could be part of something bigger that you can, it's purely a minority shareholding that you can leave to somebody in time or whatever it is. So there's certainly some upside to dealing with those larger groups if there's for a seller that you wouldn't get just in a private transaction.
I totally agree. And I 100% agree. And I think some sellers just want to sell out and be done. But a lot of sellers, they love that idea of just keeping a bit of skin in the game, a bit of connection, a bit of, you know, their business baby. But just the one caution that I always give to sellers in that situation is just understand that the buyer will deal with your business differently to what you do.
It can be stressful. They will unstitch every stitch that you put in place. They will change.
Yeah, that's right.
Not always going to be straightforward. And there's also the personality side of things, Joe. Like, you don't, as much as you deal with someone over a period of months, you really don't know who you're getting in bed with until such time as you worked with them for a long period. So you never really know how that's going to work from a personality perspective. They can be great to deal with through the transaction.
Yeah.
Who knows?
We've had a number of transactions, interestingly, where we've acted for sellers who are selling to the same entities. And it's fantastic in those instances when we can say to our clients who are coming in and a bit nervous about dealing with the buyer, hey, we know people that have sold to them in the past. Why don't you go have a chat to them? And I think if you're a buyer who has bought multiple businesses, I think that's a stellar move. Number one, you need to be a good buyer in order to use that approach, because you don't want to tell your sellers to go speak to the previous sellers and who have a negative story, right? So we're presuming here that you're a good buyer. But if you're a good buyer, there's a lot of, don't underestimate the power of testimonial of previous sellers. I think
Joe, even from a broker's perspective, if you're a broker, and we've had that conversation numerous times where I can ring a company and say, look, we've done a transaction with this buyer before, they're excellent to deal with. You know, they're really honest, they make it easy for you. And that's really reassuring, as opposed to bringing them someone we don't know what they're going to be like to deal with. So, yeah, if you do have a quality buyer and you're working on the buy side and you can tell a story of deals that you've done with this buyer in the past and other things that they've acquired and how that transaction went, it becomes easy. It becomes really a good conversation and gives the sellers a lot of comfort.
Certainly does. I completely agree with you. Dru, I just want to say a huge thank you for coming onto the show today. If we've got any businesses out there who are thinking of growth through acquisition and need someone to help them, or indeed if we've got sellers who want someone to guide them through the process, how do they get in contact with you?
Just on morganbusinesssales.com. Pretty easy. All our contact details are there, and happy to chat to anyone.
Dru, thank you so much for a fascinating discussion today. I loved it. I thought we covered some areas that are very close to my heart.
Thanks for having me. It's great to chat. Good to see you again, too.
Fantastic. Well, that's it for this episode of the Deal Room podcast. We hope you're now primed for your next deal with these pointers and have enjoyed these fascinating insights. Now, if you'd like more information about this topic, then head over to our website at thedealroompodcast.com, where you'll be able to download a transcript of this episode, as well as access any contact details and any other additional information we referred to in today's podcast. Now, if you'd like to get in contact with our guests today and the services they offer, you can go ahead and check out our show notes for a link right through to them and their details. You can also book in directly with our legal eagles at Aspect Legal if you'd like to soundboard your next steps, discuss a legal question, or find out more how we can assist, whether that's with buying or selling a business, or perhaps somewhere in between. Now, don't forget to subscribe to the Deal Room podcast on your favourite podcast player to get notifications whenever a new episode is out. We'd also love to hear your feedback, so please leave us a review and rating if you're already one of our subscribers, or even if you're listening to this podcast for the very first time. Every review helps our team produce valuable content for you. Well, thanks again for listening in. You've been listening to Joanna Oakey and the Deal Room podcast, a podcast proudly brought to you by our commercial legal practice, Aspect Legal. See you next time.
Ladies and gentlemen.
That will conclude this evening's entertainment.
Thanks for listening to the Deal Room podcast. To find out more about this episode and other episodes in the series, check out the show notes or head over to our website at thedealroompodcast.com.au.